it all behind you. I said, take down everything that stands in your way. Don't stop believing it'll work out again, my friend. Stand out and be a part of everything good. Wake up, you're gonna be all that you should. Try out all the things you always wanted to be. You'll see, 'cause I know what I know, that you've got it in you, and I see that you are a winner.
So I've heard, okay, you have to understand there's a tortoise in the background making noises. I watched a video that Old Fart made where he stops talking because an airplane is flying overhead. And I'm like, oh my gosh, if I stopped every time I had a noise in the background, I would never be making any videos, which maybe some people would think is a good thing, but whatever. Anyway, this is hopefully a short video. It's just an observation I have that I've made it before, but once again, I'm back thinking it. The whole idea that being religious, somebody who is religious is actually suffering from a form of mental illness. That religious delusion is a form of mental illness. This is something I've watched other videos about from other people. I've made a few myself. It never ceases to strike me as how similar, and I know that sentence just came out completely weird, how similar people who are religiously influenced, under the influence of religion, how similar they are to my mother, who has, well, she now has dementia to the point where you don't really, the paranoid schizophrenia doesn't show so much anymore. And I have to say it, I'm adopted, so people can say, oh, now I know why you're the way you are. No, I'm the way I am because of me. I get all the credit for whatever mental craziness I have. My mother doesn't get to have any of the credit. I worked very hard to be the complete nut job that I am right now. Took a lot of work, lifetime of effort. I want full credit for it. But no, my mother, my adopted mother, had paranoid schizophrenia her entire life, and nobody really knew about it until she got into her 80s. And she had chemotherapy for cancer, and it's very hard on you physically, and the doctors think whatever it was in her brain that was allowing her to disguise or hide from the world the fact that she heard voices went away. So suddenly she had this huge mental deterioration, basically something that she had her whole life, only now everybody could see that she had it. So my mother had these really bad delusions, and before the dementia, because she's like 93 now, so now she has dementia, and she's on medication for the schizophrenia. So it seems more like normal dementia when I deal with my mother now. It's more like normal dementia, or maybe even Alzheimer's, because she thinks that her mom's alive, and she thinks sometimes that I'm her sister. It's like she's living in the past. But 10 years ago, before the dementia started to creep in on top of the paranoid schizophrenia, I was dealing with complete 100% undiluted paranoid schizophrenia. Like I had kind of been introduced to the disease when I watched A Beautiful Mind. Up until A Beautiful Mind, I had no concept of how horrible mental illness was for the person who's afflicted. Seeing Beautiful Mind gave me some awareness of what it might be like to be mentally ill. But then when my mother, when I realized that my mother had it, and then I had to deal with my mother, I wanted my mother back. The person that was my mother, who I knew, the person who was able to hide her illness, at least somewhat, that's the person I wanted back and needed back, really desperately needed back, because all her deterioration stuff happened right after I left my husband, and I was devastated by this reality I had built up in my head, that I had a happy marriage and I had a man who loved me and that I was somebody's wife. I had this whole identity around this marriage that I thought was real, that I thought I was married to a man who loved me. And so when that all came crashing down and I realized, no, he never really did love you, I was pretty devastated. And then I went through some really hard times with some people who thought it was okay to take advantage of somebody who was emotionally very unstable and whatever. So there's a big long story there. You can check out my old videos and see me with a bloated face from taking antidepressants. My face looks just, I look hideous. I'm actually a little more overweight now than I was then. But my face looks fatter back then than it does now because it was bloated. I was bloated and it was from the medication I was taking. And I make a lot of really sad, sappy, depressing videos back then because I'm fighting depression. And now I feel like, I hate to say that I'm over it because I don't think anybody's really ever over depression. I think once you get it, you're kind of predisposed to it, but it's under control. I'm in remission right now. So anyway, I needed my mother. I desperately needed my mother, and she wasn't there, and I had a lot of resentment. I had a lot of resentment on top of the resentment that I had, the old resentment that I had toward my mother because of the fact that I was raised by this woman who had voices in her head. And now I look back and I understand, okay, it wasn't that my mother didn't love me, it was because my mother was not mentally healthy. So I can't really blame my mother for the past. I can't blame my mother for some of the things she did when I was a kid. But I felt resentful for my mother because it's like, oh great, now that I really need my mother, she's mentally ill. She's severely mentally ill. But I tried really hard. I really tried really going to use a lot of reallys right now. I fought tooth and nail to try to reach her. I tried so hard to reach her. I wanted her, I thought if I argued with her and tried to make her see what she was seeing as her reality was really not real and that it was delusion, she'd snap out of it. She'd come back and I'd have my mom back. You know, she had this idea that there was a man who was he was actually a spy and he had heart problems, and she actually arranged several weddings with this man, and she invited all her real friends, including some that lived 300 miles away, to come to her wedding, which they did. And there wasn't a wedding. The church knew nothing about it. People showed up in their nice clothes and after driving hundreds of miles, and my mom wasn't there. I asked my mother later, well, where were you? Because I went there. I went there because by the time she was doing this, I knew the situation, and I didn't know how to contact her friends. So I had to go to the church and tell her friends. I was the one that got to tell her friends, there isn't really a wedding. My mother has a mental illness. But I asked my mother, why weren't you at the wedding? And she was, because the dress designer. Now my mother also thought she was filthy rich. She believed that she had won like 3 or 4 Reader's Digest contests, and she thought that she was filthy rich, and she had all this money in safety deposit box all over the world, and she thought people were after her to try to get her money. And of course this guy who she was going to marry was also filthy rich. There's a car out there honking. I don't know if I could keep the video going because this is very distracting. It's like somebody's car is honking in the background. Anyway, I'm going to come back when it stops. Okay, it did just, oh. Yeah, okay, it stopped. So anyway, she had this whole little delusion thing going on. It's like an alternate reality, and she had imaginary people. And there was a device that I tried to, she was firmly convinced that she had a device that had been implanted in her head that allowed her to have conversations with people without the help of a telephone. Because I'm trying to talk her out of her delusions. I was like, Mom, show me a picture of this John Rossiter or whatever his name was. Show me a picture of him. Where's a picture? He gave her this beautiful ring. She was describing this ring to me, and it sounded really gorgeous. And I'm like, where's the ring? Can I see it? Oh, no, no, no. I'm having it sized. I never did see the ring. No picture. She never had a picture. I'm like, Mom, what's his phone number? And she'd throw out a phone number that was always one digit too short. So then I'd go through all the possible numbers. I'd try to call the number, and I'd try to fill in that last number with something, you know, okay, 1 through 10, and none of those variations of that number would work. So she had no actual phone number for this man. She had no actual phone numbers for the person who was in charge of her money. Same thing, incorrect phone number. One of her imaginary people was paying her rent, actually not paying her rent, and so she was getting into trouble with the landlord because she wasn't paying her rent, except she was paying her rent. My mother, her entire life, was incredibly good about paying her bills. She had outstanding credit. She was going to places like Nordstrom's and she was writing checks. She was going to fancy hair salons and writing checks and basically spending all this money that she didn't have. I actually got a phone call from Nordstrom's at one point. Do you realize that your mother? Yes, I know. So this was a really bad thing, and I went to the Adult Protective Agency, and I was trying really hard to get them to get involved because my mother was going to get evicted from the apartment that she was in, and I did not want her to come and live with me. At the same time, I did not want her to be homeless, but I knew if she came and lived with me, I would go completely bonkers because just being with her in small doses was very hard on me. So anyway, I tried for 3 years, or 2 years, maybe it was 2. To get the Adult Protective Agency involved to help my mother and to try to talk my mother out of her delusions. We had conversations on the phone. I wrote her letters. I described in detail how her story did not make sense. She broke up with John Rossiter, but then suddenly a month later she's back with somebody named John Rossiter or something. It was almost exactly the same name. And actually, I think the first one wasn't a spy, but he was a very rich man who lived in California. The second one was a spy, and she actually arranged 3 weddings. The first one is the one where all the people showed up. The next 2 people knew better, and nobody showed up. But she had a total of 3 weddings that she was telling people we're going to have a wedding. And I tried everything. I wrote her letters. I went to her house. I tried to explain. When it looked like she was going to get evicted, I was like, Mom, you're going to lose everything. Look around you. You're going to lose all your stuff. You're going to lose your... And you need to pay your bills. I did pay my bills. Fucking horn is going off again. Okay, so fast forward. We finally get the Adult Protection Agency, or whatever it's called, involved. And my mom gets evicted. Ambulance comes, takes her to... a hospital that has a psychiatric facility for seniors. She spends a month there. The first doctor didn't understand what was wrong with her. The second doctor diagnosed her. And it's funny, when I visited her in this ward, which was filled with other seniors that had mental health problems, she took me into her room and she told me, she looked at me and she says, Diane, everybody here is crazy. And they all believed her too. That was the funniest part, is she had several friends that she made while she was at this ward that were going to move in with her after they all got out. They were going to move in with her because they believed that my mother was filthy rich and had this great big house, or was going to get a great big house. Another thing was Ida Culver, which is a very fancy senior home for wealthy people. My mother hounded them. She got to the point with them that they were threatening to have a restraining order put on my mother. This is actually before she went into the hospital, but while she was still living in her apartment, because she was convinced that she had a room at Ida Culver. And she even talked about planning a barbecue and having her friends come over and having this wonderful party at poolside party, whatever. She never had a room at Ida Culver, but she had all this money, so of course in her mind she imagined that she could afford Ida Culver. So there's all kinds of stuff going on, and me is trying desperately to bring my mother back to reality, to try to show her that, Mom, she didn't have any evidence of the Reader's Digest contests that she won. When she told me she won Reader's Digest, I'm like, did you get those great big checks? Did somebody come to the door with the big checks? And she's like, no. Well, do you have a letter from them that says you won? No. Mom, how do you know you won? And she said, well, I had a vision. She had a vision that she won. So I actually, one of the things I did was I called Reader's Digest. It took me several phone calls to finally get a hold of somebody who was sympathetic. And I talked to them and told them, do you know that, my mother thinks that she's won contests with you. And I wanted her to get snapped out of her delusion. So I asked if they could send her a letter telling her that she's not in their records. They have no awareness of her. She has not actually won any contests. And they actually did this for me. They sent her a letter that said all this, and it did not snap her out of the delusions. She actually, another thing that she thought that this came from such a person. She believed in she-devils and he-devils, and she believed that people born during, I believe it was May, June, and July of any year, May, June, and July, anybody with birthdays in May, June, and July were he and she-devils. Born without a conscience, born unsavable. They were unsavable. They could not become Christians. They could not be saved by Jesus, because my mother was also very religious and had been a Christian her whole life. So these he-devils and she-devils were not savable. They were born basically just demons in human form. That's what my mom believed. So when she got the letter from Reader's Digest telling her she didn't really win all this money, that came from a she-devil. It was a she-devil who sent me that. It's a plot. So this is kind of a taste or an idea of what it was like to have a mother, and she's my only parent. My dad died when I was 6, my adopted father, and all my other relatives are in Wisconsin. So it's like, this is what it was like, and for me, trying to bring my mother back to reality when I desperately needed her. Okay, so now I've been an atheist for nine years-ish. Watch the Atheist Experience. Go to the channel on YouTube, the Atheist Experience, and listen to the callers when they call the Atheist Experience. Listen to them. Listen to Matt Dillahunty debate Ray Comfort. Any debate with a Christian, with an atheist to a Christian, listen to the Christian. It's like no matter what evidence is put before them, no matter what argument they hear, no matter how much you show that the Bible contradicts itself, is false, there's evidence to show that it was put together by men, that bits were taken out, bits were put in, forgeries were done, interpolations were done. All the very few historians that were born after this Jesus character supposedly lived, like Josephus, their works were forged because there was actually no contemporary historians who were alive during Jesus's apparent lifetime who bothered to write a single word about Jesus. So to try to make him seem like a real person, they went so far as to tamper with the writings of actual historians who were born after Jesus supposedly lived. So, you point that out to them. You point out the fact that the earliest Christians did not believe in a physical Jesus. They believed in a spirit being. You point out all the things that show there's no actual non-biblical evidence that Jesus ever lived. There's no evidence that shows gods exist. There's nothing testable or verifiable to show any effect that gods have on the planet or on the universe. You can talk until you're blue in the face. You listen to somebody like Matt Dillahunty or Seth Andrews, people who really know, or Dan Barker, even former Christians who really know their Bible, and now they're atheists, and they can totally unravel Christianity. And they do, and they do it in front of Christians, and listen to how the Christians react. It's just like my mother. It is exactly like my mother, no matter what you say, no matter how well you say it. Family Feud. No matter what you say, it's so frustrating. It's like you're talking to a fucking wall. It is just exactly like me trying to talk my mother out of her delusions. Exactly like it. You can talk to a Christian until you're blue in the face. You can point out all the evidence to show that the planet wasn't just popped into existence by a god with a few magic words, but in fact it took billions of years for the Earth to become what it is today. You can tell them, you can show them all the evidence there is for how the planet was formed or whatever, how erosion changed the shape of the shoreline, or how at one time this over here was under the sea and now it's a mountain. Oh no, the Earth was made 6,000 years ago. I mean, you can just show all different sciences, not just evolution, different sciences that point to the fact that the Earth is billions of years old, and completely impossible. It doesn't sink in. They refuse to acknowledge. They refuse to accept. They are deaf to you. They totally have walls up to you, and it's just the same. It is just the same as my mother. So it's really hard. Christians get very upset if you say that, if religious people are mentally ill, and that kind of a delusion is really no different than any other kind of delusion, except one thing. The religious delusion is something they deliberately did to themselves. It's not, people who are mentally ill can't help being mentally ill. My mother could not help that she had schizophrenia and that she had these delusions. She had no control over it, and she had no way to stop it. But Christians it's like self-induced mental illness, self-induced delusion. And I used to be that way. That's the hardest thing, is I used to be that way. I had it worked out in my mind how God used evolution. That was his building blocks for how he made the earth. It's like I took the Christianity and I took what I knew about science and I kind of wove them together to explain things. That was how I coped with the fact that science completely contradicts religion, the Bible. So anyway, this short video turned out to be really long, but I'm just once again expressing frustration for how it's really impossible. And I have actually stopped trying. I don't try to talk Christians out of their delusion anymore. I'll say when I hear someone talk about Jesus, I'll say he never existed. I don't believe he ever existed. I don't believe gods exist because there's nothing to show me that they do. I will say what I think, but I've kind of given up on trying to save other Christians like I was saved. Pardon the expression. I've given up on it because there's really no way to do it. All you can do is say what you found out when you went searching for answers, and put that out there into the universe, and maybe it'll help somebody. But really, a delusion, any form of delusion, is something that either the person's able to get over or they're not. And if it's self-induced delusion, like religion delusion, I do think that they can get over it. I do think it's possible. Any kind of other delusion is like my mother's, what she had, which is the kind that you can't help, that takes medication, and even then you're never really quite better. So that's all. I just felt like expressing what I've observed in my 9 years as a former Christian. And I have a cat meowing now, and it's turned out Teddy, my little white Persian, has become quite the champion meower. So he always picks times when I'm on the video, making a video. You can hear him in the background. So I'm going to end this. If you've been watching, thanks. Bye.
I am absolutely convinced that the main source of hatred in the world is religion. And I think it should be religion treated with ridicule and hatred and contempt.
Share the same weather, winter or summer, May or September, the 4th of whenever. It's better together. Let's get together. Home is where